Sometimes the biggest stories start small. So, how does a simple $75 citation in a little town blow up into a huge deal about fairness, power, and whether you can even trust your local government? Today, we're going to pull apart a local dispute that really gets into the weeds of how a city works, especially when it's smack in the middle of a heat of election. All right, let's get into it.
So everything really kicks off with this document right here. At first glance, it looks pretty boring, right? It's just a police media report for an ordinance violation issued to a guy named JC Heerdt. But here's the catch. JC Heerdt wasn't just some random guy. He was actively running for alderman. And the fact that this minor administrative issue was published for everyone to see in the police blotter literally weeks before the election, well, that's where our story really begins.
So, let's paint the picture. It's early 2025 in Spring Valley, Illinois. JC Heerdt is campaigning hard for a spot on the city council. At the very same time, he's also trying to sell a rental property that he just doesn't want to manage anymore. And this is the exact point where a straightforward real estate deal starts to get really, really messy. Okay, so if you look at the timeline, this is where things start to feel a little off. On February 19th, he gets a notice of violation. Just 6 days later, he emails the city clerk, puts it in writing. Hey, this place won't be a rental after March 1st. Then on March 17th, he gets a new sales contract. Things are moving along. But then, only 2 days after that, boom, he gets hit with the formal citation. I mean, considering he had a paper trail showing he was trying to comply and sell the place, the timing of that ticket felt less like routine procedure and a lot more like someone was watching him. Right, and you have to remember, this citation didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was dropped right into the pressure cooker of a local election, where every little headline, every public document could be the thing that swings a handful of votes one way or the other. To really get the tension here, you have to know who's who. First, you've got JC Heerdt, the candidate who's kind of shaking things up and questioning how the city does business. Then you have Sergeant Josh Pellegrini, the officer who wrote the ticket. And who's in charge of the committee that supervises that officer's department? Well, that would be his father, Alderman Dave Pellegrini. That family connection alone is a huge red flag for a potential conflict of interest. And listen, there was already a history between them. Months before this whole thing, back in 2023, Heerdt tried to talk to Alderman Pellegrini about a city project. And according to Heerdt, the alderman's response was, "I did a background check on you." I mean, that's a pretty chilling thing to say. That comment, plus some public arguments they had over things like ambulance funding, it all painted a picture of serious friction between the candidate and the powerful alderman whose son was now writing him tickets. Okay, now let's zoom in on the actual conversations that Heerdt had with Sergeant Pellegrini himself. Because Heerdt kept records of a few comments that he felt crossed a major line, from being a public official doing his job to something else. This first one is a doozy. Heerdt tells the sergeant that his tenants are actually in the process of buying the house from him. And the sergeant's alleged response was, they're not going to buy the house. First off, for a city employee to be speculating on a private sale is weird and unprofessional. But what's really wild is that the sale did fall through just a few days later, which made that comment feel eerily prophetic, And if that wasn't tangled enough, get a load of this next comment. When Hertz gets a new buyer lined up, Sergeant Pellegrini supposedly mentions, offhand, he works for my dad. That one sentence just ties it all together, right? It directly connects his father, the alderman, to this whole situation, making it feel less and less like a random act of code enforcement. And the cherry on top? When he was physically handing the citation to Heerdt, the sergeant apparently felt the need to say this. It's not personal. But, as Heerdt later pointed out, the moment you have to say it's not personal, it usually means it looks really, really personal. So, on one hand, you have all these tense personal interactions, but on the other hand, the citation itself opened up a whole different can of worms, this time a legal one, and it all centered on the city's demand that Heerdt pay 7 years of back fees for this rental registry. And this gets to the core legal fight. Heerdt's argument was simple. He said he was never even told about this rental registry rule until 2023. So how can the city legally turn around and bill him for 7 years in the past for a rule he didn't even know existed? It really raises some basic questions about what's fair. This whole debate touches on a pretty important legal idea called a substantive right. Put simply, it's your basic right to your own property, and the idea that the government can't just come along and slap you with surprise financial penalties for things you did in the past. It's about protecting you from retroactive punishment. And look, this isn't just some small town argument. The Supreme Court has actually been pretty clear on this stuff. A key case basically established that you can't just expand a law retroactively and then punish people under the new interpretation. That violates due process. It's a fundamental principle of our legal system. You have to be given fair warning. You can't be penalized for breaking a rule that you had no reasonable way of knowing about. So what this all points to isn't just one ticket or one officer's strange comments. It's about the system itself and how certain structures can create the appearance of bias. And sometimes that appearance can be just as damaging to public trust as the real thing. I mean, just look at this setup. You have Alderman Pellegrini chairing the committee that is directly in charge of overseeing his own son's work as a code enforcement officer. Now, even if everyone involved is trying to be ethical, you just can't deny that this setup looks bad. It practically invites people to question whether enforcement is fair, especially when it's aimed at a political rival. And check this out. On the left, you see the public police blotter for Heerdt's administrative violation. On the right is a normal blotter for actual criminal stuff. Publishing a simple, non-criminal ordinance violation like this was, according to Heerdt, really unusual. It had the effect of making a minor issue look like a serious crime, and it singled him out right when he was trying to win an election. Now, after Heerdt filed a formal complaint, the police chief did an internal investigation. And while he stood by his officer, his final conclusion is really telling. He said that going forward, he would personally handle these matters to avoid any perception of selective enforcement. Just admitting that the perception was a problem is in itself a pretty big deal. But the story doesn't just end there, with a paid ticket and a closed case. It actually moved forward, sparking a real push for some systemic changes designed to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen again. See, Heerdt didn't just get mad. He came to the city with concrete proposals. He said, put the rules on fees in writing so everyone knows what they are. Rethink having family members oversee each other on city committees. Get all the city's rules and meetings online for everyone to see. And hey, maybe try working with landlords instead of just policing them. These are all common sense ideas aimed at restoring trust. And here's the kicker. Here's why all this mattered so much. On April 1st, just a couple of weeks after that citation was issued and published, JC Heerdt lost the election by 21 votes. Just 21. Now look, we can't ever say for sure that this incident is what cost him the election. But in a race that is that razor thin, something that even has the appearance of a political hit job, well, you just can't ignore it. So this whole thing, which started with a single $75 ticket, forces us to ask a much bigger question. In any town, big or small, our trust in public institutions is absolutely essential. So it leaves you wondering, where exactly should a community draw the line between someone's personal relationships and their public duties? And maybe more importantly, who's responsible for making sure that line never gets blurred?